Good morning, everybody. I hope you're doing well.
Morning.
Sorry about that, Chevra. For some reason, my computer, uh, my internet got lost for momentarily, but it's back up. Okay, so yesterday we were talking about the laws of Hefker. Um, so when you make something Hefker, you make it Hefker unconditionally, and a person has the ability to make something ownerless. Um, the the Biurim, the lengthier commentary, points out to us that the Chachamim required us, when we declare something Hefker, to declare it Hefker in front of three people. It should not be made Hefker privately. Technically, if you make something Hefker without three people, it still is Hefker midioraisa, but midirabanan, a rabbinic ordinance, is that it has to be a public demonstration of Hefker, and and that's what we had learned in Imrei Yaakov. That he said in Vav, he said Isa b'Shulchan Aruch the Din Torah afilu Hefker b'fnei echad hareza Hefker, that midi oraisa, even when you make something Hefker privately, it's technically Hefker, and one of the ramifications would be v'nifter min ha'ma'asrot. So, for example, you can exempt yourself from tithing produce of Eretz Yisrael by declaring it Hefker, because only produce that is owned by an individual is subject to tithing. But if it's ownerless, it doesn't have to be tithed. Avol midivrei sofrim eno hefker ad sheyafker bifnei gimel. But there's a rabbinic ordinance that it has to be done publicly in front of a minimum of three people. Kedei sheyihiye echad zoche imratza v'hashnayim me'idin. And why three? So you need two witnesses and a third person who has the capacity, the capability at least, of taking possession of it. And the Ramah writes there, "V'yesh omrim demidin Torah afilu b'nei lovein atzmo havi hefker ad kamoshono," that some say that that midi oraisa, right? This is, he's just quoting from the Shulchan Aruch, that the Shulchan Aruch requires you to have three people, but the Ramah says that midi oraisa, that's still hefker even if you just did it privately. V'yesh omrim dehad ba'in gimel hainu dafka b'makarki avol b'metaltali lo boi. And there's a final opinion that says that even rabbinically, the fact that only that something needs to be hefker in front of three is only when it comes to real estate, but not when it comes to chattel. And so there's an interesting responsum that Rav Stern brings in the Biurim from the Chasam Sofer of the 19th century, Im Hifkir Eze Davar, Kaimalon de Din Torah Afilu Hifker Bifnei Achad Hareza Hefker. So he again quotes this issue that we paskin that making something hefker can be done even privately, biblically, but rabbinically, avol midivrei sofrim eno hefker ad shehavker bifnei shlosha. But rabbinically, you have to do it in front of three people. And then he quotes a tshuva from the Chasam Sofer that he talks about the following case. Dan odos more echad. There was a certain rabbi who paskined on the shaila as follows. Shehiter lemochrei tobak la'asos pe'ulasam b'shabbos al yidei goy. There was a certain company that was owned by Jews. They were tobacco salesmen. They needed to remain open 7 days a week. And so this rabbi said, every Erev Shabbos you should go over to a Gentile and declare first of all, declare your business to be hefker, and then, once you've told the goy that your business is hefker, you have him run the business over Shabbos. V'yafkiru bifnei shlosha b'chol Erev Shabbos. And they should stand in front of, in other words, have the Gentile do the work, and then the owner of the company should stand in front of three people and declare it to be hefker. Okay, so you'd think that if you can make something hefker like that way, that should be all right, yeah? So is there any problem with doing that? That was the question that was brought before the Chasam Sofer. Guy wants to keep his business open, but he knows that a Jew is not allowed to operate a business on Shabbos, so he'll declare it to be hefker in front of three people every Erev Shabbos, and that way the business won't belong to him, it'll belong to somebody else. Now, notice that there's no discussion here about who gets the proceeds, who gets the profits of the tobacco sales on Shabbos. That he's not dealing with now, but just the question of whether the mechanism itself will work. So the Chasam Sofer has multiple problems with this technique, but he says at one point in the tshuva, Lahafkir v'hu bevesu u'rishuso lo shamanu, ela lahafkia isra chametz min haTorah. He says the only time that you can declare something hefker while it still remains in your house, and that's a valid mechanism, is only when it comes to chametz before Pesach. That's the only time where such a declaration of hefker is taken seriously. And what's the reason why chametz is different? Mishum shahachametz eino birshuso shel adam ve'asao hakasuv ki'ilu hu birshuso. And the argument is that there's a Gemara in Masechet Psachim, page 6b, that states that there are two things that really are not in a person's possession, but that the Torah makes it as if it's in your possession. What are those two things? One is a bor b'rishus harabim. One is if I dig a pit in public property. The Torah holds me liable for any damages that are caused as a result of my digging the pit. Now, when you think about it, you could say, why should I be liable for digging a pit on public property? It's not my property. Why should I be held liable? It's one thing if I damage you with my own property. So my own property, I'm responsible for my own property. But if I go over to a property that's public property, it doesn't belong to me, and I dig a hole, how can the Torah hold me liable? My property didn't cause any damage. So there's the concept that the Torah says that you are liable. It's explicit in the Torah in Parshat Mishpatim. It's explicit that you are liable. So it's because the Torah makes it as if it's yours, even when it's not yours. And it's one of those unique situations where the Torah says, Hashem says, I don't care whether it's your pit or not, you're responsible. Okay? Because I make it as if it's your property whenever it causes damage. And the second thing, says the Gemara, is chametz on Pesach. Now, chametz on Pesach, the Torah says, is asur b'hana'ah. You're not allowed to derive any benefit from it. Once an object, you cannot derive benefit from it. It doesn't belong to you anymore. It's as if it doesn't belong to you, because you have ownership by definition means that you have control over an object. Once I lose control over what I can do with an object, I'm no longer a legitimate owner of that object. So really, the Torah declares me to be to this chametz, not that I have no dominion over it. I have no control over chametz. But the Torah says, but if you have it in your possession on Pesach, you're liable for a prohibition of what's called bal yira'eh u bal yimatzeh, that you may not have chametz in your possession. So even though I'm not, it's usher, completely usher to me, it's totally out of my purview, the Torah makes it as if it's mine. And therefore, only in that situation where it's really not yours anymore to any significant degree, does the Torah say that making it hefker, by saying this chametz is hefker on Erev Pesach, do you legitimately have the right to make something hefker and yet still keep it in your home? Because it's a very, even before you made that declaration of hefker, it really wasn't yours to any serious extent anyway. And therefore, we permit you to declare it hefker and still keep it in your house. And that's the reason why, we tell, there's a halacha. Yes, you're supposed to do bedikas chametz. You're supposed to check your house for chametz before Pesach. But is it likely that there may be some crumbs behind the refrigerator? Yeah, for sure there may be some crumbs. There may even be a slice of bread or an old challah roll that you forgot about that's been there for years because you haven't been behind the refrigerator or behind the stove or whatever it is. Of course it's possible. But because you made it hefker, you said, Kol chamira v'chamia de'ika birshusi, any bread, any crumb, any chametz that is in my possession, yehe hefker ara. Remember those words. You recite them after bedikas chametz. May they be hefker, ownerless, like the dust of the earth. That's a declaration of hefker that you make even when you know that the chametz is still in your possession. And the reason why it works is a sui generis kind of situation only with chametz, because the chametz already, even before you made that declaration, really doesn't belong to you in any significant way. And that's the reason why a declaration of hefker when something is in your possession works. But uvegiloi daita delo nichalei sagi, and therefore just saying that you don't want to be the owner anymore of the chametz is sufficient. Aval hacha, but in a situation where you have a warehouse full of tobacco, and you want to make sure that the tobacco is no longer yours, so that a Gentile can wheel and deal with it on Shabbos, boi hefker gomer, v'tzarech shiyotzi mirushuso al kol panim ad kan lashona. He says, but in all other aspects of making something hefker, in order for hefker to really be meaningful in any way, you have to physically remove it from your possession. So to declare anything hefker while it still remains in your home is not a significant declaration. Even if it were to be done in front of 3 people, you would not really be accomplishing, at least rabbinically not, you would not be accomplishing any declaration of hefker. So I just wanted to point that out. Now, how then to the Chassam Sofer's situation, where a person has a business that needs to stay open in order for it to survive, how does, or let's say today in an internet business, how can a business remain open on Shabbos when we know that a Jew is not allowed to do commercial trade on Shabbos? How does a Jew's business stay open? There is a way to do it, but it's a little bit more complicated than just making your business hefker. You have to draw up a contract. The contract has to be made with the Gentile, and it has to be made clear that the Gentile is a partner in the business and that he is entitled to certain compensations as a partner, and it has to be taken seriously. If it's done in a cavalier way, without going through the proper mechanisms, so then it's not okay. But there are ways to do it, and it's done all the time. And if anyone ever has a situation where they find themselves in that predicament, they can always speak to me, and I'll be able to help them. Obviously, is it better for a Jew's business to be closed on Shabbos? Obviously so. It's better not to rely on any kind of contractual situations whenever it's possible. But you should only do this if there's no way to sustain your business if it's closed on Shabbos. I just wanted to make sure that you were aware of that.
Rabbi,
Yes,
I've, I've gone through the process already because I run a manufacturing company with a number of employees. So I've gotten around from not opening on Shabbos. So sometimes the Hagim present an issue, especially when you have 4 weekdays, a short span together. So I did drop that contract, and I have a Gentile partner, and I try to sort of calculate somewhat the profits of that day to give to that sort of partner. And
very good. Very good. Excellent. Okay, but you're also, by the way, you're allowed to deduct the cost of doing business from those profits. You recognize that. I hope you recognize that.
Yes, I do.
He's also responsible for paying the utilities and all of the wages and workers' comp insurance and all of these other things for those days that he's a partner. He's not just entitled to the profits. So, all right, very good. Okay. All right, so let us go on. I think we did all of the Imrei Yaakov that I wanted to show you for today. So once a person has declared something hefker, the Rav Shulchan Aruch said in Hifker Eza Davar Uba Acher Lizkosvo, and if a person has declared something hefker, and another person comes and he wishes to take possession of that object, Eino Rashai Limchosbo Lomar Shalihu. You can't stop the guy. You can't. Seinfeld can't stop Newman from taking possession of it by saying it's mine. Once you made it hefker, it's no longer yours. Aval kodem sha'acher zocha bo rashaihu atzmo lizkos bo kishar zocha min ha'hefker. But let's say I put out the object on my front lawn, and before a person comes along, I change my mind. I have that prerogative. I can always, if I leave something, I make it hefker, and I put it on the front of my property, I can always go back and say I've changed my mind, and go back and pull it in before anyone else gets it. Because when something's hefker, it's ownerless, then I, as the previous owner, have as much of a right as anyone else to come and claim it for myself. So I put out, my wife puts out my favorite chair, thinking that it's full of holes and it's tattered. And then I come home from work and I say, "What's my favorite chair doing on the front lawn?" And she says, "Oh, you still want that old thing? The springs are broken." Says, "Well, that's where I do my best thinking, right? It's the chair that I need in order to succeed in anything in life." So you pick it up and you pull it back inside. You certainly can do that as long as but if someone else took possession of it and they already put it on their pickup truck and they're about to pull away, you can't say that's my chair. The guy literally can charge you and sell you back your own chair if it was already made hefker. Now it could be that you might be able to argue in the scenario that I just presented you that perhaps the wife of the home did not have the legal right to make it hefker, right? And if that's the case, by her putting it out on the front of the lawn, may not have been a sufficient declaration of hefker. That's a possible argument to make, but certainly if I put it out there, and then a guy comes along and he's already taken possession, I cannot stop him from taking it. Okay, and on that the Imrei Yaakov says, "V'im humoche humoneya me'acherim liskos bo over mishom bal yachel," and you're in violation of a Torah law, because once you declared something hefker, if you violate your words, it's no different from violating anything else that comes out of your mouth. Once you make a verbal commitment that something has the status of hefker, by trying to treat it as yours is like the violation of a neder, because as we said, according to some poskim, a declaration of hefker is like taking a neder, like taking a vow. So the and also we had said that if you want to repossess it, you can, but repossession has to be done with the mechanics of taking possession of something. Dafka b'derech kinyan. You'd have to, it's the thing that's on the chair that's on your lawn. If you wanted to repossess it, you'd have to pick it up or do something else to show ownership. Aval bahabatalo, just by looking at it, would not be sufficient. Dekaimalon, because we paskin harotze, habata behefker lokanya, that just looking at something that's hefker is not sufficient to take possession of it. Just
Rabbi, can I just going back to the idea about the witnesses? First of all, can like let's say a katan, a shota, or the various types of people may that usually can be disqualified for being witnesses? Is it more broader for in this case when you need 3 witnesses? And my other question is that when you want to make something sort of odorless, usually you don't care and you just want to, it's not something you want to put a lot of effort to go out and get 3 witnesses. You're putting a lot of effort into making something that's going to be ownerless. It doesn't
yeah,
sort of make
so
sense, really.
it's a rabbinical ordinance. It's a rabbinical requirement. There are times when making something ownerless is actually a legal advantage. Um, and a person, for example, one example that we just gave was we saw in the Imrei Yaakov. If I have produce from Eretz Yisrael and I make it ownerless, it's now exempt from tithing. Another example is that there are certain halachos that only a poor person is allowed to take advantage of certain things. So, for example, there's a mitzvah of payah. There's a mitzvah where a landowner has to leave a corner of his land unharvested in order to allow the poor to partake of it. So if there's a legal definition of what a poor person is. If I want to partake of that person's corner of his field, I can actually make myself a poor person legally by declaring all of my assets to be hefker. And there are certain times, even in provincial or secular law, that divesting ownership of property is beneficial from a tax perspective or whatever it may be. People do it all the time. That's what a tax shelter is, right? So for that reason, the rabbis required that you have to have 3 people present so that it doesn't become too much of a legal fiction, because there are real consequences when something is hefker, if you divest yourself of property and so forth. So they said, yes, mideoraisa, biblically, hefker does not require anything other than a verbal declaration. But midorabanan, you have to do it in front of 3 people for it to make sure that it's not going to be treated too cavalierly. Okay. So let's take a look now at the next seif. Hamidbarot hayamim v'hanaharot v'hayarim v'chol ma shebahem hem mufkarim va'omde me'aleim. So first, don't jump on me when I translate this law, but you'll see that it's going to vary and depend upon government law. But without any other considerations, anything that is found in a desert, in the ocean, in a river, or in a forest, that real estate and all that is contained within that real estate is considered to be hefker. Va'omde me'aleim. And basically it's completely independent property. V'chol hakodem bahem zacha. And whatever you find out there, you have a right to take because it's hefker. Kagon, latzud chaya va'of sheba midbar. So, for example, to hunt deer or birds out in a desert or in a wilderness, v'dagim shebiyamim uvanaharos, or to catch fish in the ocean or in rivers, you don't need a license according to halacha in order to be able to go fishing, right? Or to go to trap deer. The lilkot asavim shebiyar, the ha'etzim v'hapero shel ilanos yar, or to gather herbs from the forest, or to gather wild growing berries and fruits that are out in the forest. This is all legal because this property belongs to nobody. It's hefker. And as he writes in the parentheses, Lefi she'adayin lo hechzik bahem adam bechazaka hamoelas al pi haTorah liknos ba min ha'hefker. He says, because no one has made a legal acquisition of this property using the techniques that are prescribed from the Torah in order to acquire real estate. Shahayu mufkarim va'omdim misheishis yimei bereshis, because from the time of creation, this property was given to the world by God. God made this property hefker. Ki chazaka hamoelas bi'ilanos hi keshiyavod avoda hamoelas li'ilan. Because how do you acquire, let's say, different kinds of real estate? Well, it depends. If I want to make an acquisition on a tree so that all the produce that grows from the tree is mine and I can charge people for it, I have to make a kinyan on the tree. I have to do some kind of work, let's say, by aerating the soil around the roots of the tree. Va'az kana oso ilan bilvad sha'avad bo. But only then I only acquire that tree. I don't acquire any of the adjacent trees. I'd have to do that with every single tree. V'im avad eza avoda hamoeles beguf hakarka kana hasada kula im kol ha'ilano sheba. Or if, let's say, I want to acquire a specific field, I have to work along the borders of that field to delineate that that field is mine. And then I can acquire all of the trees that are contained within the field. Uviyar lo avad adam avodas karka v'lo avodas ilanos b'chol ilan. But in a forest, that's not what happens. In a wild forest, we don't find that people do any kind of significant agricultural cultivation to declare themselves the owner and to acquire from hefker the real estate or the trees that are in a forest. Lefichach heim hefker bein shehem bigvul nachri bein shehem bigvul Yisrael b'chutz la'aretz shelo nitchalka lishvatim al pi Hashem. And therefore, any land outside of the land of Israel is considered to be completely hefker, regardless of who draws the property lines. Right? It doesn't make a difference. If it's a forested area and no one's made a legitimate kinyan, even if the map says that it belongs to a certain individual, but if he never made or a certain entity, but if that entity never made a physical kinyan, a physical acquisition by working the property, they are not the legal owners of the property according to the Torah. Now, in Eretz Yisrael, however, it's different because Eretz Yisrael was allotted to the individual 12 tribes by God. Rak shezacha bahem Yisrael mehefker ein zichiyasu klum below chazaka hamoeles. And the only so if a Jew wishes to take possession of any property outside of Eretz Yisrael, he would have to do so with a proper chazaka, with a proper demonstration of ownership. So this is the standard halacha. This is the standard halacha, that you can go hunting out in a forest because anything that is contained within that forest is considered to be hefker, is considered to be totally ownerless. So if we take a look at the Imrei Yaakov over here, he says, Latsud chayav va'ovsha b'midbar. He says you're allowed to hunt out in the forest, out in the wilderness. Uvilvad shelo yatsud b'stei chavero. That's provided that you don't hunt in your friend's field. V'im avar v'tzad sham kana. And if you do hunt in your friend's field, then even though you were trespassing, nonetheless the Shulchan Aruch says that you acquire the animals that were running or flying through the field. V'im haya omed ba'al hasada b'toch sadehu va'omar zachsa li sadi kana ba'al hasada ve'ein leba'al hametzura klum. If, however, the owner of the field, after you trap an animal, you throw a net over a deer that's running through your neighbor's field, okay, and the owner is standing there, and he says, I hereby declare that my field has acquired that animal, then he becomes, the owner of the field becomes the legal owner of that animal, because we paskin that if something is resting on my property, and I make a declaration that I wish for my property to acquire it, my property acquires it. And that will be true even more so if there's no one standing, if the owner is not present, but the property has a fence around it, then even if the owner is not present, his property immediately acquires anything that runs through his field. He says, let's see, he says, I talked about this already in Siman Dalid, and we'll make reference that in Mirza Hashem tomorrow. Okay? So we'll hold it here for today.
Rabbi, quick question, not related to this year. Do the new Ontario stay-at-home orders, does it have any impact on minyanim at the shul?
Right, so we got a ruling on that yesterday. The minyanim in shul are not affected. We can still have 10 people per service, so we're continuing as business as normal. We're just being very, very cautious.
Okay, thank you very much.
I recommend the same for everybody. I've already told my wife that she should not be going to Costco anymore. It's just not safe. We'll live without the whatever tchotchkes we used to buy at Costco for